Finds the AFP's warrant used to raid the home of journalist Annika Smethurst was invalid. Donald Trump claims the World Health Organization has failed in its basic duty over coronavirus, and he halts US funding.
The WHO's reliance on China's disclosures likely caused a 20-fold increase in cases worldwide, and it may be much more than that.
Scott Morrison makes a direct appeal to teachers to keep schools open during the pandemic. And the cruise ship involved in Australia's biggest coronavirus cluster could leave New South Wales on Sunday. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. The High Court has thrown out a search warrant used to raid the Canberra home of News Corp political journalist Annika Smethurst. Ms Smethurst published a story suggesting there were plans to expand the powers of Australia's international listening post, the Australian Signals Directorate, based on leaked classified information. Political reporter Matthew Doran is at the High Court in Canberra. Hi there, Matthew. So what did the court find today?
Well, Ros, News Corp and Annika Smethurst asked the court to consider three claims. First of all, they wanted the warrant chucked out, saying that it hadn't been specific enough about the alleged breaches of laws that she had made in receiving these leaked documents. Secondly, they wanted the court to consider whether the law itself that allowed the AFP to get a search warrant had breached or infringed on the implied freedom of political communication here in Australia. And thirdly, they wanted an order saying that the AFP had to hand back the documents and data that they seized during their raid of Ms Smethurst's home, and also documents and data that they seized from her personal mobile phone. They wanted an order saying that the AFP had to give that back or destroy their copies of those documents. The court found that in the first instance, the warrant itself was invalid, that there hadn't been enough specific detail in that warrant to make it a valid warrant. It hadn't said specifically what she was alleged to have done. Rather, it made general terms, general claims about her breaching official secrets laws. Because they quashed that warrant, the High Court didn't go into the broader constitutional debate about the freedom of political communication. It said it didn't have to because the warrant itself wasn't valid. And thirdly, it hasn't actually made a ruling about what should happen to those documents. It's left that wide open. A few of the judges said that they should be given back on a USB stick to Ms Smethurst so that they can be destroyed, but the court didn't come to an official ruling on that, so that matter does remain somewhat open.
Has there been any reaction to the ruling so far?
We've heard so far from the Australian Federal Police themselves. They say that they acknowledge and will look at the decision by the High Court. They're not making any further statement at this stage as to whether or not it will impact their investigation into this leak of classified information that led to Annika Smethurst publishing an article back in April saying that there were plans afoot to expand the powers of the Australian Signals Directorate. The MEAA, the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, has also issued a statement. They are the union representing journalists, saying that they welcome the decision to quash the warrant, but they have raised concern with the fact that the High Court didn't go further in looking at the constitutional issues, and also haven't ordered that those documents and that data be returned to Ms Smethurst. The effect of the High Court not making a ruling with regards to that data is that the AFP still have the documents and they can still use them further down the track if there is any sort of trial that arises from this against Ms Smethurst or anyone else for that matter. What could happen there is that lawyers involved in that case could make an admission or a submission rather to the court saying that, well, the High Court has found that the warrant itself didn't have any legal authority, therefore this evidence itself should be inadmissible and not be able to be used in any trial. But that is something that would have to be looked at further down the track if indeed any trial does pop up from this investigation. OK, Matt, thank you.
And later this hour, we'll be speaking with the MEAA Union President Paul Murphy on this. The rate of new coronavirus infections across Australia continues to slow as the effects of physical distancing measures are felt. Victoria has confirmed 8 new cases. There are 16 in New South Wales and 1 for Queensland. The death toll remains at 62. The Prime Minister is encouraging teachers to keep classrooms open despite his own Education Minister admitting he wasn't sure if his kids would be attending school tomorrow. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has launched a new inquiry into the Ruby Princess debacle as it's revealed the cruise ship could set sail this weekend. Overseas, US President Donald Trump is cutting funding to the World Health Organization, accusing the global body of mismanaging the coronavirus crisis. And the International Monetary Fund is warning that the global economy is facing its worst decline since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The federal government insists it isn't sending mixed messages to parents and students during the coronavirus pandemic. It comes as Prime Minister Scott Morrison urges teachers to do what they can to keep schools open. Political reporter Jade McMillan joins us now from Canberra. Jade, take us through the detail of this.
Well, schools have been an incredibly controversial issue right throughout this crisis, but the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, insists the expert medical advice to the government has not changed and that schools are considered safe. Now, he's released a video on social media targeted at teachers. In it, he's thanked them for their work and urged them to be there for the students who cannot learn from home. He says there are a couple of reasons why that might be the case. If children have parents who physically need to attend work, or if they come from disadvantaged or vulnerable households and simply won't get the education that they need if they're not in school. Now, this message coincides with the beginning of Term 2 in Victoria. Parents there have been told to keep their children home if they can, but the Federal Education Minister, Dan Tehan, insists that the Prime Minister's messaging on this has been consistent, and he says that it isn't at odds with the states.
If parents need to work, or for vulnerable students, you should be attending school. And that's been adopted by all the states and territories. Now, there are obviously different approaches within that in different jurisdictions, and states and territories ultimately have the final decision with what happens with their schools in their state or territory. But the clear message is for all those parents who are working and they can't look after their children safely at home, schools are open and your students can attend school. For all those vulnerable children, schools open and you can attend school.
The Federal Education Minister, Dan Tehan, there. Now, the Victorian Premier, Daniel Andrews, was also asked about this morning, and he insists that he's rejected suggestions that this could be confusing for parents. He says that the message is if parents can keep their children home, they should, but if they can't, there are options for them.
The position is absolutely clear. If you can learn from home, you must learn from home, but schools are open. And just to this point, we didn't go down the path of listing 7 or 8 different jobs or 7 or 8 different reasons. We said, look, everyone's circumstances are different. Let's let parents make that decision themselves.
Jade, on another issue, there have been some dire predictions about the economic impact of the virus. What's been the reaction here?
Well, the International Monetary Fund is forecasting that the global economy could shrink by 3% this year. That would be the worst recession since the Great Depression. And it's also warned that Australia could be one of the worst hit economies in the Asian region, with a contraction of 6.7%, and also that unemployment will average 7.6% this year before rising to 8.9%. Now, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, says that those numbers were put together before the federal government announced its $130 billion JobKeeper wage subsidy program. He says that that will have a significant impact when it comes to keeping Australians in work.
The other point to make is at the time that the IMF were putting together their figures, the Australian curve was heading in the wrong direction, if you like. We were seeing an exponential increase of more than 20% a day in the number of cases of coronavirus affected people. Since that time, we've bent that curve and we're seeing a growth of less than 2% per day, and our health measures are making significant progress.
the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg there. Now, the IMF has warned that there are still a lot of uncertainties around its forecast, but Mr Frydenberg has pointed to the fact that it is saying it expects a global economic bounce back in 2021.
Jade, thanks. US President Donald Trump has accused the World Health Organization of a coronavirus cover-up and says he'll stop his country's funding. North America correspondent James Glenday joins us now from outside the White House. So, James, tell us more about what the president has said.
Good afternoon, Ros. Well, it was certainly another entertaining day and newsworthy day here at the White House for Donald Trump's daily update. Instead of the normal briefing room, he went to the Rose Garden, which is normally where a president goes to make a fairly substantial announcement. He spoke about propping up the local airline industry, but the main portion of what he'd come to talk about was the World Health Organization. He said that the WHO had failed. It should have been able to contain the virus to China, and worse than that, he actually accused the organisation of propping up some of Beijing's deception about human-to-human transmission of the coronavirus in the early parts of the actual outbreak itself. He said that the United States would be immediately halting all payments to the WHO. America is the organisation's biggest single funder, and we also have a little bit of what the Commander-in-Chief had to say. Here's that now.
Had the WHO done its job to get medical experts into China to objectively assess the situation on the ground and to call out China's lack of transparency, the outbreak could have been contained at its source with very little death, and certainly very little death by comparison. This would have saved thousands of lives and avoided worldwide economic damage. Instead, the WHO willingly took China's assurances to face value.
So, James, what's been the reaction there to this move to stop funding?
Yeah, well, the WHO has faced quite a lot of criticism from Western leaders in Australia. I think Josh Frydenberg's recently had some comments about it, and also here in the United States too. But some of Donald Trump's political opponents are particularly worried that this decision to suddenly stop funding to the organisation in the middle of a global outbreak, a pandemic, could actually end up costing lives in the long run. And they say it isn't the appropriate response, though some of his opponents have actually supported an investigation into exactly how this played out. It has to be said that amid all of this, and just in the past couple of days, the president has appeared to be under increasing pressure. Today, we again saw the highest death toll on record for the United States in terms of COVID-19 deaths, a lot of them in New York. The outbreak does appear to be plateauing, but the numbers are still quite shocking. More than 26,000 people have died from the virus here just in the past few weeks, and so he is facing a lot of criticism about that, and he has also in recent days not just hit out at the WHO but also at his political opponents, the media and state governments, attempting to blame some of those different groups for the rising death toll and also the economic carnage that is being caused by the lockdown measures.
James, thanks. The cruise ship at the centre of